The smell hit me before the pain did. Copper, wet asphalt, gasoline seeping into rain. I remember tasting blood at the back of my throat, thick and warm, and thinking, absurdly, that it tasted like old pennies my mother used to keep in a jar on the windowsill. My ribs were somewhere they shouldn't have been. The world had gone sideways, literally. The highway divider was above me instead of beside me, and the last sound I heard was the hiss of steam escaping a ruptured radiator, hissing, like something disappointed in me. 3 months earlier, I had been kneeling on homecoming turf with my wrists behind my back, while 3,000 people cheered. Let me back up further than that. Let me start where it actually started, because by the time the handcuffs came out, I was already dead. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Emily Carter. In my first life, I was 17, valedictorian track, National Merit Scholar. Full ride to Stanford sitting in my inbox like a held breath. I had a boyfriend named Ryan Sinclair who smelled like drugstore cologne and locker room deodorant. A best friend named Jessica Cole who wore rose perfume so sweet it made my molars ache, and a school that loved me right up until the exact moment it didn't. The night everything ended, I was standing at the 50-yard line in a navy dress my mother ironed twice because her hands were shaking. The stadium lights buzzed overhead, that flat electric hum you only notice when you're about to lose something. Principal Dunmore's voice crackled through the PA system, warm and proud, announcing the student of the year. Then 2 squad cars rolled onto the track, headlights washing gold over the grass, and I understood in the space of about 4 seconds that I was not receiving an award. Emily Carter, you're under arrest. The officer's voice was flat, procedural, like he was reading a grocery list. Theft of final exam materials, embezzlement of $80,000 from the school's charity fund, unauthorized access to the school's computer systems, distribution of private student data. I remember the metal of the handcuffs cold, then colder, biting into skin that had never done anything wrong. I remember 3,000 people finding their voices at the same time, and none of those voices belonged to me. Someone in the junior section screamed scammer, like it was a chant they'd been practicing. Ryan turned his face away like I was something spilled on his shoe. Jessica pressed both hands over her mouth, and even through the chaos I saw, I times swear, times I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward before the tears came. Fake tears smell like nothing. That's the thing nobody tells you. Real grief has a smell, salt, sweat, the acidic tang of adrenaline. Jessica's tears smelled like her rose perfume, and nothing else, because there was nothing else behind them. It took the district 4 months to admit every piece of evidence against me had been fabricated. 4 months for someone in records to notice the login timestamps didn't match. For a forensic accountant to notice the money trail led somewhere else entirely. By then, Stanford had already rescinded my admission. The scholarship board had already reassigned my funding. My mother had already been let go from her job, for the sake of the district's reputation, her supervisor said, not quite meeting her eyes. My father, who had spent 30 years managing a small hardware store with the kind of quiet dignity that doesn't survive a scandal, had a stroke in the parking lot of the county courthouse, the day the charges were formally dropped. Too late. Always too late. We lost the house within the year. I was driving my father to a follow-up appointment on a rain-slicked October night, the kind of rain that turns headlights into smears of white, when a truck jackknifed across 2 lanes and turned my life, quite literally, into wreckage. I remember the last 3 seconds with total clarity, the taste of copper, the hiss of the radiator, and one single, useless thought looping through what was left of my mind. If I could go back. If I could just go back. I opened my eyes to sunlight. Not stadium light. Not hospital fluorescence. Actual, warm, late September sunlight, slanting through gauzy curtains I hadn't seen in how long had it been. I lay very still, breathing in the smell of my mother's lavender fabric softener, the specific staleness of a bedroom that hadn't been aired out yet, and underneath it, faint and sweet, the smell of toast burning downstairs, the way it always did on Tuesdays. because my mother set the toaster wrong and never fixed it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up with hands that weren't shaking, hands that were 17 years old again, unscarred, unbroken. The date on the lock screen made my chest cave in. 7 days before homecoming. I sat up so fast the blood rushed from my head, and for one dizzy second I thought I might faint straight back into whatever afterlife had spat me out. Instead, I just sat there, in my own bed, in my own body, 7 days before the worst night of my life, and I laughed a short, ugly, disbelieving sound that didn't sound like relief at all, because relief would have meant I trusted this second chance. What I felt instead was colder than that, calculating, almost clinical. I remembered everything. I remembered whose hands had taken the spare key from the janitor's cart. I remembered whose fingers had edited the hallway camera footage frame by frame over 3 sleepless nights. I remembered whose email address had been spoofed to frame me, whose voice had made the anonymous call to the police tip line, and whose face had been laughing loudest, not sadly, not shocked, loudest times when the cuffs closed around my wrists. This time, no one else knew what was coming. Only me. I got dressed slowly, listening to the house the way I hadn't let myself listen in years. The specific creak of the third stair, the tick of the kitchen clock that ran 4 minutes fast, my mother humming off-key over the burnt toast. Ordinary sounds. Sounds I'd buried a family under, in another life. Another timeline that no longer technically existed but that I could still taste, coppery and rain-soaked, in the back of my throat, whenever I closed my eyes too long. This time will be different, I told myself. Not because I would fight harder, because I would not fight at all. Jessica found me at my locker before first period, the way she always did, rose perfume arriving a half second, before she did sickly sweet, department store cheap, dressed up to smell expensive. In my old life, I used to think it smelled like flowers. Now I knew it for what it was. The smell of something trying too hard to cover a rot underneath. Oh my God. Did you hear? They're doing the Student of the Year thing at homecoming this year, not graduation. Isn't that so exciting? Her voice pitched high with an enthusiasm that, once you knew to listen for it, had a seam running right down the middle, genuine on the surface, hollow just beneath. So exciting, I said, and even I couldn't tell if I meant it as sarcasm or bait. She looped her arm through mine, warm, familiar, a gesture I'd once mistaken for love. Her diamond stud earrings a gift from an admirer, she'd always say. Vague and pleased with herself, caught the fluorescent light of the hallway. You're definitely getting it, she said. I mean, who else? You're basically perfect, Em. Basically perfect. The words that, in my old life, always made something in my chest glow warm with gratitude. Now they just sounded like measurements. Like she was sizing up exactly how much space I took up in a room she wanted for herself. I let her keep talking. I nodded in the right places. I did not tell her that I already knew about the USB drive she would carry in her bag by Thursday, or the encrypted messages on her phone with a number saved only as R, or the meeting she'd have after school on Friday in the parking lot behind the gym, where a car with tinted windows would idle for 6 minutes before pulling away. I knew all of it. I said none of it. Ryan caught up with us by the trophy case, sliding an arm around my shoulders, his drugstore cologne and gym bag musk arriving in a wave that used to feel like safety and now just felt like a warning label. Hey, superstar, he said, kissing my temple. Big week? Huh? Big week, I agreed. He didn't know yet that his football scholarship, the one riding on a college recruiter's visit, scheduled for the following Tuesday, depended entirely on a spotless disciplinary record that he was about to torch on my behalf for reasons that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with a number of favors he owed people much more dangerous than a high school girlfriend. That morning, in government class, Mr. Holloway announced the scholarship committee would finalize the national merit nomination that Friday, the $80,000 full ride that in my old life had been quietly redirected the moment I was arrested, reassigned to a name I hadn't recognized until 4 months too late. I already knew whose daughter's name that was. After class, in the hallway by the science wing, I did something I hadn't done in my old life. I sought out the daughter in question, Madison Wren, the school board member's kid, sweet-faced, soft-spoken, the kind of quiet that made people assume kindness instead of calculation. And I told her, with a small, tired smile, that I'd been thinking about deferring the nomination anyway. Stanford could wait a year. I wanted to take a gap year, work somewhere real, figure out who I was outside of grades. Madison's eyes lit up like a struck match. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious," I said. And I meant every word of it, just not the way she thought. She hugged me before she caught herself, arms stiff with restrained excitement, her perfume different from Jessica's, cedar and something metallic underneath, like a wallet left in a car too long, filling the space between us. "You're literally the nicest person I've ever met," she said. I smiled and said nothing, because nice had never been the word for what I was doing. I was setting the table. I was letting the wolves believe the lamb had wandered off on its own, so that when they finally sat down to eat, no one would think to ask who'd left the door open. But seeds don't grow on their own. They need soil, and I spent that first week building it quietly, with the kind of patience only a dead girl learns. Tuesday night, after my parents had gone to bed, I disassembled the smoke detector in the upstairs hallway and rebuilt it around a micro camera I'd ordered under a stranger's name, paid for in cash. From a summer job I hadn't worked yet in this timeline, but remembered the exact pin to access anyway. My hands were steady, in a way that surprised me. No tremor, no hesitation. Just the calm, mechanical focus of someone assembling a bomb they intend to let someone else detonate. Wednesday, I paid a junior in the AV club $40 and a favor to help me wire a second camera into the underside of my hallway locker shelf, angled to catch anyone who opened the door without my permission. He didn't ask why. 15-year-old boys rarely question $40. Thursday morning, before first period, I clipped a small pin to the strap of my backpack, cheap-looking, the kind of thing that could pass for a school spirit badge, but wired to record continuous audio and sync automatically to a private cloud folder the second it connected to campus Wi-Fi. I changed 6 passwords that week. I backed up every email I'd ever sent or received to 3 separate accounts. I photographed the serial number on every USB port in the library computer lab because, in my old life, one of those ports had been the exact place someone plugged in a drive that ended my life, and this time I wanted a paper trail before the crime had even finished being committed. None of it felt like justice yet. It felt like construction cold, technical, unglamorous. Copper wire under drywall. Nobody thanks you for wiring a house correctly. They only notice when it burns down, and by then it's too late to ask who did the wiring. By Thursday, Jessica had the USB drive. By Friday, Madison's mother had made 2 calls to the district office that would, in a week, redirect $80,000 of scholarship money into an account that didn't officially exist yet. By Friday night, in the parking lot behind the gym, the car with tinted windows idled for exactly 6 minutes, and Jessica got in. I watched from the tree line, 40 yards away, close enough to catch the smell of exhaust and rain on hot asphalt, far enough that no one would ever know I'd been there at all. The trap wasn't sprung yet, but the bait had been taken. And somewhere behind my ribs, in the place where grief used to live, something colder and steadier was settling in instead. The celebration started before the trap even finished tightening around itself. By Monday, Jessica had a new bracelet, thin gold, the kind that looks delicate, until you notice it costs more than her mother's car payment. She wore it into homeroom with her wrist turned outward, angled so the light caught it whenever she reached for her pen. And she caught my eye doing it, like she wanted me to notice and pretend not to. "Cute bracelet," I said. "Oh, this old thing?" she said, and laughed the way people laugh when they want you to ask a question they've already prepared an answer for? I didn't ask. I let the silence do the work instead, and I watched her smile falter for exactly 1 second before she covered it with more laughter, brighter, louder, aimed at Ryan across the room instead of at me. Ryan's college recruiter visit had been moved up. Coach Delgado announced it Tuesday morning over the PA. A full scholarship offer from a Division I program, contingent on a final character reference from the administration. Ryan practically floated through the hallway that afternoon, clapping shoulders, laughing too loud, smelling of victory sweat and drugstore cologne turned up a notch, like he doused himself in it that morning, out of pure nervous joy. He found me at my locker. Recruiter said I'm basically a lock, he said, grinning, and for one strange second, I almost felt something like nostalgia. Not for him, but for the version of myself who used to believe that grin. That's great, I said. You deserve it. He didn't hear the second meaning buried under the first. He never did. That had always been his gift, an unshakable talent for hearing only what flattered him. He kissed my temple again before jogging off, and his cologne stayed behind a second too long, thick and sweet and chemical, and for one disorienting heartbeat, I wasn't standing in a hallway at all. I was on the highway, tasting copper, the hiss of the radiator filling my ears like static. My hand found the locker beside me before I even registered reaching for it. Metal cold and real under my palm, and the hallway snapped back into focus. Fluorescent lights, scuffed linoleum, a freshman laughing too loud, 2 lockers down. I breathed until the taste of pennies faded from the back of my throat. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. That was the strange mercy and cruelty of being the only person who remembered dying. You could stand in a hallway full of people and drown quietly, and the bell would still ring on schedule, and everyone would still go to class. I went home that night to a version of comfort I hadn't let myself feel in months. Years, really, if you counted the version of me that had died on a rain-slick highway. My mother was at the stove, stirring a pot of the same lentil soup she always made on Tuesdays, the smell of cumin and burnt garlic thick enough to taste. My father sat at the kitchen table doing the crossword with a pencil he refused to sharpen properly, so every answer came out in soft gray smudges. "How was school, Em?" my mother asked, not looking up from the pot. "Fine," I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't meant fine in longer than I could measure. I helped with dishes. I listened to my father complain, cheerfully, about a customer who tried to return a lawnmower 2 years out of warranty. I went to bed in a house that still had all 4 walls, all 3 of us breathing under the same roof, and for a few minutes before sleep took me, I let myself simply exist inside that ordinary warmth without picking it apart for evidence. It didn't last. It never does in this kind of story. But I wanted on record that it happened, that there were nights, even inside a revenge I'd built with both hands, where I was simply, quietly happy. The first crack showed on Wednesday. I was in the library during a free period, 3 tables back from the circulation desk, when Jessica slid into the seat across from me without asking. Her rose perfume had gone slightly sour underneath the way sweetness turns when it's been sitting too long. The good part gone, and only the sugar left, cloying. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Her thumbnail was chipped. She'd been picking at it. "Sure. Do you ever feel like..." She stopped, started again. "Do you ever feel like something's gonna go wrong, even when everything's going right?" I studied her face for a long moment. Under the fluorescent lights, without the usual filter of a phone camera, I could see the beginning of dark circles she'd covered with concealer, 2 shades too light. Her eyes kept flicking to the door. "All the time," I said. "Honestly." She laughed, short and brittle. "Yeah, me too lately. It's stupid. Everything's finally..." She cut herself off again, glanced at the bracelet on her wrist like it might answer for her. Never mind. Forget I said anything. "Jess." I said her name softly, the way I used to say it when I still believed we were friends. If something felt wrong, you'd tell me, right? For one unguarded second, something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt, exactly. fear. The particular fear of someone who has taken a very large gift from someone she doesn't fully trust and has just started to wonder why the gift was offered so easily in the first place. "Of course," she said, and the word came out too fast, too rehearsed. She left before the bell rang, her chair scraping the floor with a sound like a small, dry scream. I sat there another minute, watching the door she'd walked through, and thought, good. Let the doubt sit in her chest and rot a little every day. Let her wonder what she doesn't know. Fear is a slower poison than a car crash, but it works. By Thursday, the escalation had a shape. I overheard Madison Wren's mother, Councilwoman Wren, a woman who wore her authority like a tailored blazer, crisp and unbothered on the phone in the school parking lot after drop-off. Her voice pitched low, but not low enough. The transfer needs to clear before Friday, not after. If the district audits that account before the scholarship's reassigned, we have a problem, and I am not having a problem, Gerald. Fix it. I stood behind a delivery van, close enough to catch the tail end of her perfume, expensive cedar and something metallic, the same scent that had clung to Madison's hug days earlier, and I understood, with the flat clarity of confirmed suspicion, that the money and the frame job were not separate schemes. They were the same machine, and Madison's mother was one of its gears. That night, at the diner where I'd taken a part-time hostess job, a job that, in my old life, I never would have needed, and that now felt like the first honest thing I'd built with my own hands, I met someone who didn't belong to any of it. Daniel worked the grill. He was quiet in the way people are quiet when they've had to be. Not from arrogance, but from carrying things nobody asked to help carry. He had flour on his forearms and burn scars faded pale against his skin. And when he handed me my order pad at the start of a shift, he said, "You've got the look of someone doing complicated math in her head." And it was such an accurate, unshowy observation that I actually laughed a real laugh. Unpracticed, the first one in longer than I wanted to admit. "Just tired," I said. "Sure," he said, in a tone that told me he didn't believe it and didn't need to. The diner smelled like frying oil and burnt coffee, and underneath it, the strange comfort of a room where nobody wanted anything from me except correctly delivered orders of hash browns. I came back the next night, and the next, and somewhere in the rhythm of clattering plates and Daniel's dry, unhurried jokes, I started building something that had nothing to do with revenge at all. A life, small and real, running quietly parallel to the trap I was still tightening. I told myself this was just cover, a place to be ordinary while the machine did its work. I wasn't sure, some nights, if that was entirely true. The following Tuesday, a burst pipe flooded the diner's back kitchen an hour before close, and Daniel and I spent 45 minutes hauling waterlogged boxes of napkins and paper cups out to the dumpster while Mo, the owner, cursed at the water main in 3 languages. My sneakers soaked through. My hands went raw from the cold hose water. At some point, Daniel handed me his jacket without asking, wordlessly, and the wool was rough against my collarbone, smelling of grill smoke and cheap detergent, nothing at all like cedar or drugstore cologne, and I remember standing in that ruined kitchen, thinking it was the first thing anyone had given me in weeks that didn't come with a price tag attached. "You didn't have to do that," I said, meaning the jacket. "I know," he said, mopping water toward the drain with a squeegee. "Wasn't a transaction, Em. You looked cold. That's the whole reason. It shouldn't have landed as hard as it did. It was such a small thing. A jacket, 45 minutes of unpaid labor, a sentence with no strings hidden in it anywhere. But I'd spent a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, now, around people whose kindness always came itemized, and something about a gesture, with no invoice attached, made my throat go tight, in a way I didn't examine too closely. Another night, closing shift, just the 2 of us and the hum of the walk-in cooler, he asked out of nowhere, "You ever notice you flinch every time someone wears cologne in here?" I went still. "No," I lied. "Okay," he said, easy, not pushing. sliding a rack of clean mugs onto the shelf. Just an observation, not my business. I almost told him the truth that night, not the whole truth, not rebirth and revenge and a highway in another life, but some smaller, true-shaped piece of it. I didn't. But I noticed, walking home under a sky gone thin and starless, that I'd wanted to. That the wanting itself felt like something worth protecting, separate from everything I was building to burn down. Friday, the wire transfer cleared. I know this because I'd flagged the district's financial portal weeks earlier with an alert tied to my own backup account, one small advantage of remembering. In my old life, exactly which login credentials the district IT department never bothered to change. $80,000 moved from the school's charity fund into a shell account linked, 3 hops removed, to Councilwoman Wren. That same afternoon, I passed Ryan in the parking lot, his cologne thick enough to taste, and he grinned at me with the easy confidence of a boy who thought the hardest part of his life was already behind him. "Recruiters coming Monday," he said. "This is it, Em. This is everything." "It really is," I said, and something in my voice must have carried an edge, because his smile faltered for half a second before he shrugged it off and jogged toward the locker room, whistling. I stood in the parking lot a moment longer, feeling the first cold gust of October wind cut through my jacket, and let myself remember just once, just for a breath, the exact smell of the highway on the night I died. Copper, gasoline, rain hissing off a ruptured radiator. Not this time, I thought. Saturday afternoon, the day before homecoming, Ryan cornered me outside the gym after practice. His hair still damp, his cologne reapplied so heavily I could taste it 2 feet away, bitter at the back of my tongue like it always used to be right before it turned into blood. "You've been weird all week," he said. Not accusing, exactly more like a boy checking an instrument panel, making sure nothing was about to malfunction before he needed it to work. "Weird how?" I asked. "I don't know. Quiet. Like you know something." He laughed, but it came out thin, missing its usual confidence. "You don't know something, right?" I looked at him for a long moment, the easy jaw, the practiced grin, the eyes that had never once, in either lifetime, looked at me and seen anything but his own reflection. What would I know, Ryan? Nothing. Forget it. He shifted his gym bag on his shoulder, too casual, the gesture of someone talking himself out of a question he was afraid to finish asking. "It's just big week. Recruiter. Homecoming. All of it. I need everything to go right." "It will," I said. "Everything's going to go exactly the way it's supposed to." He smiled, relieved, hearing only the reassurance and none of the double edge underneath it, because that had always been his gift. Hearing only what flattered him, right up until the moment the world stopped bothering to flatter him at all. "You're the best, Em," he said, and jogged off toward the parking lot, whistling something tuneless, cologne trailing behind him like a warning nobody else in the world seemed able to smell. "This time, I watch you build the house on the fault line. And when it falls, I'm not standing anywhere near the wreckage." Saturday night, I finally saw Jessica hand the USB drive to Ryan behind the gym, exactly where I'd known she would, exactly at the hour I'd known it would happen. I watched from the tree line the same 40 yards of distance, the same smell of exhaust curling into cold air as she pressed the drive into his palm with hands that weren't quite steady. "You're sure this works?" she whispered. Even from the trees, I could hear the strain under the whisper, thin as ice on a puddle. "It'll work," Ryan said. "Rick already tested the login spoof. Once this goes on the school server Monday night, it's done. M takes the fall. The scholarship reassigns clean. My recruiter never even blinks. And if someone traces it back, no one's tracing anything. She trusts us. She has no idea." Jessica laughed then, the same brittle laugh from the library, but with something harder threaded through it now, something almost cruel. God, it's almost sad. She's going to walk into homecoming, thinking she's getting an award. I stood in the dark, breathing slow, and let the words land exactly where they were meant to hurt, because I needed them to. Needed the anger clean and cold, instead of hot and reckless. needed to remember, in vivid and total clarity, that the version of me who trusted these two people was already dead on a highway somewhere she'd never have to relive. They didn't see me. They never did. I walked home under a sky gone starless with cloud cover, the first real cold of the season biting through my sleeves, and thought about how strange it was that the people plotting my destruction had no idea they were the ones walking into a room with the lights already rigged to fall. Homecoming night arrived exactly the way I remembered it, down to the flat electric hum of the stadium lights and the specific chill in the air that made everyone's breath show white above the bleachers. 3,000 people packed the stands. My mother sat in the third row in the same navy coat she'd worn in my old life, hands folded tight in her lap, unaware she was watching a rerun. My father sat beside her, healthy, upright, no stroke, waiting for him in a courthouse parking lot this time, a fact that steadied something in my chest even as my pulse climbed. I wore a navy dress, not out of sentiment, out of precision. I needed every detail to line up so that when the moment came, no one could claim confusion about what they were watching. Principal Dunmore's voice crackled through the PA, warm and self-important, building toward the Student of the Year announcement. I walked down to the 50-yard line when my name was called, the grass cold and slightly damp under my shoes, the smell of trampled turf and distant popcorn thick in the air. 2 squad cars rolled onto the track. Headlights washed gold across the field, right on schedule. An officer read the same charges, word for word, like a script neither of us had bothered to rewrite. Theft of exam materials, embezzlement, unauthorized system access, distribution of private data. The stadium found its voice the way it always did. Someone screaming scammer, someone else laughing, a ripple of phones lifting to record my humiliation for an audience far larger than the one already watching. Ryan turned his face away, jaw tight, with something that might have been guilt if he'd had the capacity for it. Jessica pressed both hands to her mouth, and even from 20 feet away, over the roar of the crowd, I caught the thin, sour note of her rose perfume, gone slightly rancid, with real fear this time instead of performance. The cuffs came out, cold metal, biting. I let it happen exactly as far as it needed to happen, right up to the second before the cuffs closed. The same second where, in another life, my last free thought had been times if I could go back. This time, I raised my phone instead. "You're sure you want to do this?" I said, and my voice carried further than it should have, cutting clean through the crowd noise. "Before you watch this video?" The officer paused, hand still on my wrist. Principal Dunmore's mouth opened and stayed open, no words arriving to fill it. I nodded toward the stadium's massive LED screen, the one built for instant replays of touchdowns, now about to replay something else entirely. I'd routed the footage through the AV booth an hour earlier, using a login the district had never bothered to secure, timed to trigger the instant my phone connected to the local network. The screen flickered, then filled with grainy hallway footage. Jessica, keys in hand, letting herself into a locked classroom after hours. A murmur rippled through the crowd, like wind moving through wheat. Second clip. Ryan hunched over a laptop in an empty AV closet, timestamps ticking in the corner as he scrubbed frames from the hallway camera feed. The murmur turned into something sharper. Third clip. Mr. Halloway, alone at his desk after hours, swapping answer keys with the careful, practiced hands of someone who'd done it before. Gasps now. Real ones. Fourth clip. An email draft window. My name in the sender field, a message I never wrote, composed on a laptop that was very clearly not mine, in a font that didn't match anything I'd ever typed. Fifth clip. The one I'd saved for last. The one I'd been building toward since the moment I opened my eyes 7 days in the past, a text message thread. Councilwoman Wren's contact photo, unmistakable, at the top of the screen. Once Emily's expelled, the scholarship reassigns clean to Madison. Make sure the drive gets planted before Monday. G. The stadium went silent. In a way, 3,000 people rarely manage all at once. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I looked at the officer still holding my wrist. "So," I said, "quiet now, almost gentle. Still sure?" The collapse happened fast, the way collapses do once the load-bearing lie gives out. Jessica's mascara had already started running before anyone said her name aloud. Thin black tracks cutting through foundation. 2 shades, too light. The careful mask she'd built over the week, dissolving in real time under stadium lights, that had nowhere left to hide her. Her hands shook so badly, the gold bracelet chimed faintly against itself. "That's not, I didn't." Her voice cracked on the second syllable and never recovered. She turned to Ryan, eyes wide with the particular panic of someone realizing, in front of 3,000 witnesses, that the person she trusted to share the blame was already 3 steps away from her, putting distance between them like she was contagious. "I don't know what she's talking about," Ryan said, too loud, too fast, sweat cutting through his drugstore cologne in a way that made the whole performance smell like exactly what it was. She probably faked all of this. She's obviously desperate." "Desperate," I repeated, and let the words sit in the cold air a moment. That's an interesting choice of word for someone whose recruiter is sitting 4 rows up, watching all of this live. Somewhere in the stands, a man in a polo shirt with a team logo stitched over the breast pocket stood up, phone already lowering from where he'd been filming. His expression gone carefully, professionally blank, in the specific way of someone mentally rescinding an offer in real time. Officers who'd arrived to handcuff me were now moving through the crowd toward different targets entirely. Mr. Holloway, seated near the faculty section, went pale and still, the color draining from his face the way it drains from someone who has just watched their entire alibi evaporate on a jumbotron. He stood up so fast his folding chair clattered backward onto the bleacher behind him, and for a moment he just stood there, mouth working soundlessly. A man watching 20 years of a teaching career dissolve in real time under stadium lights he'd never once imagined would be pointed at him. "I can explain," he said, to no one, to everyone, his voice cracking on the second word. Chalk dust and stale coffee. The smell that had clung to him for 2 decades of homeroom mornings seemed suddenly, absurdly present in the cold night air, as if his whole ordinary life was leaking out of him all at once. It wasn't I was told it wouldn't hurt anyone. I was told by whom, Gerald? Principal Dunmore's voice, sharp now, no longer warm and proud, cutting across the stadium PA system he still hadn't thought to release. He turned, slow and stricken, toward Councilwoman Wren, and 3,000 people turned with him. Councilwoman Wren stood rigid near the 50-yard line, designer heels sinking slightly into the turf, her cedar and metal perfume doing nothing to cover the sudden, sharp smell of fierce sweat breaking through her composure. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, to no one in particular, her voice pitched for a press conference that was never going to happen the way she wanted it to. "I want my lawyer. You'll get one," an officer said, already reaching for his radio. Jessica turned to me one last time, mascara tracking down to her jaw now, the rose perfume gone completely sour, curdled by adrenaline and fear into something almost chemical. "You knew," she said, and her voice had dropped so low only I could hear it over the roar building back up around us. "You knew this whole time. Since the beginning," I said. "Then why?" Her breath hitched. "Why did you let it get this far? Why didn't you just stop it?" I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. The way I hadn't let myself look at her in my old life. Past the diamond studs and the rose perfume and the practiced warmth, down to whatever had always been underneath. Thin and hungry and willing to let someone else's life burn for a bracelet and a scholarship that was never hers. "Because you needed to take it all the way to the end," I said. "Before you could understand what you actually did." She had no answer for that. For the first time since I'd known her in either life, Jessica Cole had nothing to say at all. The morning after homecoming, I found Madison Wren sitting alone on the curb outside the school's front office, still in the sequin dress she'd worn the night before, mascara long since cried away, sequins catching thin gray morning light instead of stadium spotlights. I didn't know, she said, before I'd even fully sat down beside her. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual polish. I swear to God, Emily, I didn't know what my mom was doing. She told me you were deferring. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I studied her for a moment. The genuine wreckage in her face, different in texture from Jessica's, different from Ryan's. Madison's guilt smelled different too, if guilt has a smell at all, sour and young and frightened, without the sour, sweet rot of someone who'd known exactly what she was taking and taken it anyway. I believe you, I said and meant it. That doesn't make it free. You still benefited from something you should have asked more questions about. But you're not your mother, Madison. Not yet. What you do next is the only part of this that's still yours to decide. She started crying again, quietly this time. No performance left in it. I didn't put an arm around her. I didn't tell her it would be okay, because I'd learned, the hard way, twice now, that empty comfort costs more than honest silence. What do I do? She asked. Testify, I said. Tell the truth about what you knew and when you knew it, all the way through, even the parts that make you look naive instead of innocent. It's the only version of this that ends with you standing on your own 2 feet in 5 years instead of borrowed ones. She nodded, wiping her face with the back of a wrist still ringed with cheap stadium glitter, and for the first time since I'd woken up 7 days in the past, I felt something that wasn't quite triumph, and wasn't quite pity, something closer to the tired, clear-eyed relief of watching one small piece of wreckage choose, on its own, not to sink with the rest of the ship. The last time I saw Jessica in person, it was 3 weeks later, in a visitation room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, a smell so far removed from rose perfume that I almost didn't recognize her without it. She looked smaller across the table, not thinner, exactly just diminished, the way people get when the performance finally stops, and there's nothing left underneath to hold the posture up. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger, and somehow older at the same time. No bracelet, no diamond studs, just chapped hands folded on a metal table bolted to the floor. You could have warned me, she said. No preamble, like she'd been rehearsing it the whole drive, the whole time's walk, since she didn't have a car anymore either. I could have, I agreed. Then why didn't you? Because you would have done it anyway, I said. You didn't take that USB drive because you were tricked, Jess. You took it because you wanted what I had, and you didn't care what it cost me to get it. A warning wouldn't have stopped you. It would have just made you more careful next time. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, something flared behind her eyes, the same performative hurt she'd always been so good at, the trembling lip, the wounded blink. But there was no audience left to perform for, and the expression collapsed almost as fast as it rose, leaving something raw and less rehearsed underneath. I loved you, she said. You were my best friend. You loved what I had, I said. There's a difference, and some part of you has always known it. She flinched like I'd hit her, and for one strange second, I almost felt something soften in my chest. Old muscle memory, the ghost of a friendship that had once felt real to at least one of us. I let it pass through me and out the other side without holding on to it. That version of tenderness had died on a highway in another life, and I wasn't interested in resurrecting it just to hand it back to someone who'd feed it to the same fire twice. It's not fair, she said, quieter now, almost to herself. You had everything already. The grades, the scholarship, Ryan, all of it. Why couldn't you just let me have one thing? You didn't want one thing, I said. You wanted my life, minus me in it. There's a difference between asking someone to share what they have and deciding you're entitled to take it, and you crossed that line so long ago, you stopped noticing where it used to be. She was quiet for a moment, staring down at her chapped hands, folded on the metal table. When she looked up again, something in her face had shifted, not softened exactly, but stripped down closer to the bone. Do you hate me? I considered the question honestly. the way I hadn't let myself consider much of anything the first time around, back when hate had felt like the only fuel available to me. "No," I said. "Hating you would mean you still cost me something. You don't anymore. You're just a person who made a choice, and then another choice, and then a much bigger one. And now you're sitting in a room that smells like bleach, wondering why nobody warned you." "I'm not angry. I'm just finished." "Finished," she repeated, like the word tasted strange in her mouth. "I'm not going to forgive you," I said, standing. "I'm not going to tell you it'll be okay. I'm just going to tell you the truth, because you've never once asked for it honestly before. You didn't lose your life because of me. You lost it the day you decided mine was worth less than what you wanted from it." She was crying by the time I reached the door. Not the practiced, camera-ready tears from homecoming, but something uglier and more honest, the kind of crying that doesn't care how it looks. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to see that I hadn't already watched happen once, in a life I no longer had to relive. The consequences unspooled over the following weeks, with a thoroughness that almost surprised me, even though I'd engineered every piece of it. Jessica was charged with unauthorized computer access and evidence tampering. Ryan lost his scholarship offer before the ink on it had even dried. His name quietly scrubbed from the program's recruiting page like he'd never existed. Mr. Holloway was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours and terminated within the month, his pension tangled up in an investigation that would take the district over a year to fully untangle. Principal Dunmore resigned 2 weeks later, citing personal reasons in a statement that fooled absolutely no one. Councilwoman Wren was placed under a formal ethics investigation that made the front page of the local paper 3 separate times. Her cedar and metal perfume presumably still intact, her composure very much not. Stanford's admissions office called my house on a Tuesday evening, and I remember my mother answering the phone with the wary, clipped voice she'd developed over a week of strangers, calling to ask about a scandal that no longer existed. Her face changed halfway through the call confusion, easing into something disbelieving, then something close to tears. "They're reinstating you," she said, phone still pressed to her ear, hand over the receiver. "M, they're reinstating your admission. And the scholarship committee wants to talk about," they said something about expanding the endowment in your name. I didn't cry. I'd expected to. Somewhere in the planning of all this, some part of me had assumed the relief, when it finally arrived, would feel like something breaking open. Instead, it felt quiet, almost anticlimactic, the way a held breath feels when you finally remember you're allowed to let it go. "Tell them yes," I said. "Tell them thank you." Local news picked up the story within days, then regional outlets, then, briefly, a national morning show that wanted me to sit under studio lights and describe, in 90 seconds, what it felt like to be vindicated. I gave them careful, unremarkable answers. I didn't mention the cameras I'd wired into my own locker. I didn't mention the 7 days I couldn't explain having lived twice. Some truths aren't safe to hand to strangers with microphones, no matter how much they smile at you first. I ran into Ryan exactly once more, 6 months later, outside a courthouse annex where his hearing had just wrapped for the afternoon. No scholarship offer waiting for him now. The recruiter had rescinded it within the hour. The story too public, too damning, too easily searchable for any program willing to risk it. He'd lost 30 pounds he didn't have to lose. His cologne was gone entirely, replaced by nothing, by the flat, unremarkable smell of a boy who no longer had anything to prove to a mirror. "You planned all of it," he said. Not a question. "I did," I said. "Why me?" His voice cracked, and for the first time in either lifetime, I heard something that might have been genuine confusion instead of performance. "I loved you. Or I thought I did. Doesn't that count for anything?" "You loved being seen with me," I said. "There's a difference. You found that out the same week everyone else did. You just didn't want to admit it while it was still convenient not to." He didn't have an answer. He never did. Not really. That had always been the quiet architecture of him, underneath the grin and the gym bag confidence. A boy who'd never once had to build his own foundation, because someone else's admiration had always done the work for him. Take that away, and there was very little left standing on its own. I left him on the courthouse steps, cologneless, foundationless, and didn't look back to see how long he stood there before he finally moved. The night before homecoming, exactly like the first time, a clipped and doctored video appeared on 3 platforms within the same hour. 12 seconds of grainy footage, cut and reassembled to show me standing outside the AV closet at a time I'd actually been at the diner, my face pasted just believably enough onto someone else's shoulders and gait by whoever Ryan's Rick turned out to be. The caption read, "Guess who's been hacking the school system? No context, no proof. Just enough doubt dressed up as evidence to do exactly what it was built to do." By midnight, it had 30,000 views. By 6 a.m., when I checked my phone over a bowl of cereal I didn't have the appetite to finish, it had crossed 200,000, climbing in the ugly, self-feeding way outrage always climbs. Once enough strangers decide they're entitled to an opinion about a stranger's guilt. Number Arrest Emily was trending in our metro area by breakfast. Comments piled up faster than anyone could have read them. Some gleeful, some vicious, most simply bored people mistaking cruelty for entertainment. My mother saw it before I could stop her, scrolling her own phone at the kitchen table, her face going. The particular shade of pale that comes from watching your child's name turned into a punchline by people who've never met her. "Emily, what is this? Why are people saying—" "It's not true," I said. "None of it. I promise you, by tomorrow night it won't matter." She searched my face for a long moment. My mother, who had spent a lifetime being able to tell when I was lying about homework, about curfews, about small, harmless things, and something in what she found there made her set the phone face down on the table without finishing her sentence. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Okay, Em." She didn't ask again. I don't know, to this day, if that was trust or exhaustion or some instinct mothers carry that doesn't have a clean name. I only know I was grateful for it in a way I never adequately told her, because some gratitude only makes sense in hindsight, once you already know how the story ends. I didn't post a response. I didn't defend myself in the comments, didn't cry on camera the way half the internet seemed to be waiting for, didn't do any of the things that, in my old life, had made the pile-on worse rather than better. I turned my phone face down on my nightstand, same as my mother had, and let 200,000 strangers believe whatever they needed to believe for one more night. They'd find out the truth soon enough. Everyone always does, eventually. The only question that ever really matters is whether you're still standing by the time they do. A year later, I walked through the wrought iron gates of Stanford under a sky so blue it looked freshly painted, the September air smelling of cut grass and somebody's distant campus barbecue. Sunlight, warm enough to feel like a hand resting flat against my shoulder. My phone buzzed as I crossed the quad. A text from a number I hadn't deleted only because some petty, curious part of me wanted to see how it would end. If I could go back, I'd never have touched anything of yours. I read it once. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel forgiveness. Either just a quiet, settled stillness, like a lake after the last stone has finally stopped rippling outward. I deleted the message. Daniel was waiting for me by the fountain near the history building. Flower permanently ghosted into the creases of his knuckles, even 3,000 miles from the diner, because some things, like the good kind of habit, travel with you when you let them. He didn't ask about the text. He'd learned, over the past year, exactly which silences to let sit undisturbed. "Good walk?" he asked. "Good walk," I said, and meant it the way I meant very little else, back when I still measured my life by other people's approval instead of my own. I sat down on the edge of the fountain, dipped my fingers into the cool water, and let the sun warm the back of my neck, while somewhere nearby a bird I couldn't name kept repeating the same 3 notes, patient and unbothered, like it had nowhere else it needed to be. I thought about the girl who died on a rain-slick highway, tasting copper, believing right up until the very last second that being good would eventually be enough to save her. It wasn't goodness that saved me the second time. It was patience. It was watching. It was letting the greedy hands close around the thing that would burn them, instead of wasting my own hands trying to fight them off. I don't know if that makes me better than the people who destroyed my first life, or exactly as cold as they always were, just aimed in a different direction. My mother calls every Sunday, and I let the phone ring twice before I answer, not because I'm busy, but because I like the small, ordinary suspense of it. The reminder that there's still someone on the other end of a line who has no idea what it costs to get here, who only knows her daughter is safe and warm and 3,000 miles away learning things out of choice instead of necessity. My father sends photos of the hardware store's new display window, proud of angles nobody else would ever notice, and I save every one of them, because in another life I never got to see him proud of anything again. Some nights, I still catch the ghost of gasoline on wet pavement after it rains, and my chest goes tight for exactly as long as it takes to remember I'm not on that highway anymore, that the version of me who died there stayed there, and the one sitting by this fountain got to keep walking. I've stopped apologizing to myself for how long that particular flinch takes to fade. Some things don't owe you a timeline. I only know I gotta walk through these gates, this time, on my own 2 feet, and that the wreckage, whatever it cost the people who built it, was never going to be mine to carry again. If you were me, would you have saved her or walked away? Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?